Hello and welcome to today's webinar on revalidating for the first time, an opportunity for self-development and reflection. My name is Charlotte Jakab-Hall and I'm a registered adult nurse. I'm currently working as a senior practice development nurse and senior peer support guardian at Gloucestershire Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. And I'm really thrilled to be here today to talk to you about revalidating for the first time. So the learning outcomes for today are to understand the purpose of the NMC's revalidation, understand the requirements that you need to complete and submit your revalidation, and we're going to explore the different ways in which you can reflect and complete your continued professional development hours. So why is revalidation important and what is it? Well, revalidation is a process which all nurses and midwives in the UK and also nursing associates in England need to follow to maintain their registration with the NMC. And this needs to be done every 3 years. So you'll pay your license fee every year annually, and then you'll have to submit a revalidation every 3 years. So revalidation is about promoting good practice. It's about giving the assurance to the public and enabling them to have confidence in the nursing and midwifery profession. So the process itself, it's really about encouraging you to reflect on the role of the code in line with our practice, and also it enables us to demonstrate that we are really living those standards that are set out within the code. And it's important to know that it's not about making an assessment of your fitness to practice, okay? It's very much about an opportunity for continued professional development and learning. So I'm going to play you a short video by the NMC, and it just summarises kind of all of the requirements that you'll need for revalidation.
As healthcare professionals, you have high standards, and you know how important that is for the people you care for. From April 2016, nurses and midwives will need to revalidate with the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Revalidation is a new process that will help you keep up to date in your professional practice. It's designed to make sure you're practicing safely and effectively, in line with the code. Every 3 years, you'll be asked to show you've met the minimum number of practice hours and that you're keeping up to date with your professional development, as well as getting feedback from those who matter most. You'll need to reflect on your practice and discuss it with another nurse or midwife. You will then need to show your confirmer how you've met the requirements. Sound daunting? It isn't. A full list of the requirements can be found on the NMC website, as well as information on how to apply. Revalidation doesn't have to be a headache, especially if you keep your portfolio up to date. Just remember, revalidation is in everyone's best interests. Yours and theirs.
So that's a nice, sweet summary of why we're doing it and what's expected of you. So I'm going to try and break some of this down for you to try and alleviate any kind of worries you might have or any anxieties about doing this for the first time. So what are the requirements? So you'll need to meet a range of different requirements to demonstrate that you're keeping your skills and knowledge up to date. And it's all about maintaining safe and effective practice. And honestly, it's really not as complex as it might seem initially. And I appreciate that this, seems quite a daunting list at first, but hopefully we'll break this down to a much more reasonable way of managing it. So you do require 450 practice hours, and that's in total. But if you're renewing 2 licenses, so for example you're both a nurse and a midwife, or you're an adult nurse and a mental health nurse, you would then be required to do about 900 hours. So you will also need 35 hours of CPD, and this will need to include at least 20 hours of participatory learning, and we'll go into that a bit later on in the presentation. You'll need 5 pieces of practice related feedback, and you'll also need 5 written reflective accounts about things that you've experienced. You'll need to have a reflective discussion, as it mentioned in the video, and you'll also need to do some declarations, health and character declaration, and a professional indemnity arrangement confirmation, and then you have your final confirmation of submitting a revalidation. So breaking it down then, we'll start with practice hours. So you'll see you must have practiced for the minimum numbers that are listed in that table there. And that's over a 3-year period, okay? So since your registration was last renewed or since you joined the register. So 450 hours, it feels like a lot when you see it on the screen, but actually in reality, it's only 60 short shifts to actually meet this requirement. And remember, this is over a 3-year period. So you'll actually have, 1,095 days to complete those 60 shifts and even actually an extra day if you've got a leap year. So it's very achievable. So these practice hours then should reflect your current scope of practice, but they don't have to be related to what you were originally doing when you joined the register, for example. So when I started as a newly registered nurse, I was working on an acute medical ward. And then when I revalidated last, I was a digital specialist nurse, for example. So the hours count towards this requirement are worked hours that rely on your skills, knowledge, and your experiences as a registered nurse or midwife or nursing associate. And this could include providing either direct care to patients, but it also can include things like managing teams, teaching others, helping to shape or run a care service. People get really bogged down about it being very about direct patient care, but actually, nurse lecturers, for example, or educators, they all nurse researchers, these all count towards your hours as long as it's about shaping nursing or midwifery services. So this is important in terms of your career planning too. So don't let that put you off in terms of how you keep your license. So the NMC have recommended template for this. So you can get that by downloading it on the NMC online website, and it just helps you to record your practice hours in a really clear and concise way. So CPD then. So in total, you must undertake a minimum of 35 hours of CPD. So and that's also relevant to your scope of practice within that 3-year period. So of those 35 hours, you need at least 20 that are participatory learning. So what they mean by participatory learning is that the learning involves interaction with one or more professionals, so a group activity or group learning. And this can also be a physical environment, or it can in fact be in a virtual space. That also counts. So this could include attending conference like RCN Congress, or taking part in a workshop, being part of an online course or a university program. It can also include group meetings that would be kind of outside of your everyday practice, for example. So it still has to be a learning event taking place. For example, it might be to discuss a specific event or a new quality improvement idea. That could count as your CPD. So the NMC recommend that you use their template online to just keep, again, very accurate records of your CPD. And although the code is very central to the planning of your revalidation, they also suggest using the standards of proficiency as a key resource when planning your CPD. So that's really helpful. It's on the NMC website. The NMC don't really recommend any particular type of CPD. This is really up to you, and actually it should be based on your interests and your own development as a professional. So CPD really shouldn't be seen as a burden, is what I'm trying to say. It's honestly a fantastic opportunity for you to grow in your knowledge, your understanding, develop your own career opportunities, and even build upon networking and connections and future pathways. I think my favorite type of unknown CPD, actually, which I will mention, and this is very prominent within the @WeNurses on Twitter. They host Twitter chats, and those tweet chats actually count towards your revalidation. They're a fantastic opportunity, easily accessible and free. So that's a really great way of revalidating through CPD, in my opinion. So practice related feedback then. You must gain at least 5 pieces of practice related feedback. So Remember, again, this is in line with your own scope of practice. So it must be within the 3-year period since your registration started or was renewed. So you must have it while you've been practicing as a registered nurse. So a kind of common assumption is that this piece of written, it has to be written feedback. Okay, that's obviously what people tend to think. I must have a card from a patient, for example, but actually it can be verbal, and it can be formal or informal. There's no kind of absolute for it. It may come from patients and service users, or it may come from colleagues and management. And actually, you can also draw out feedback from team performance reports, or even your annual appraisal. Actually, is another really good source to get that feedback. And it's important to make note of any feedback that you receive, or if somebody says something fantastic to you verbally, get it down, jot it down. So make sure you've got it there as evidence of that, when it took place, the date, and the basis of that information to support your evidence. But it's also important to include how you might use that feedback. So how you can actually use that to improve your practice, or how have you reflected upon that feedback. It's not just about literally getting that feedback. So you should be careful also when dealing with your feedback to ensure confidentiality. Okay, so with regards to any kind of patient feedback, for example, such as a card or any kind of written letter, just black out any names that might identify people, or any kind of information that you think might be a risk in terms of confidentiality. And that might be the same for your colleagues if you want to keep it anonymous. And that's acceptable and absolutely fine. And when we qualify, we do have this tendency to get a little bit kind of lethargic with gaining feedback from others. We spent 3 years of having to get it, and so it feels like, oh, I just want to avoid it for a little bit, maybe. But actually, maybe it's something also to do with kind of a fear of rejection, or being challenged in our own practice, and imposter syndrome, actually being a really big fighter against feedback and wanting to gain it. But feedback is really essential, and it's about growing your emotional intelligence and your self-awareness, and you will become a better practitioner, a better reflective practitioner, if you are seeking out regular feedback. So try to do this by setting yourself some goals. So don't wait right until the end of the 3 years. Think about this every year. Perhaps you don't have to do it every week, but maybe you're setting yourself a goal of, I'm going to try and get some 360 feedback from different groups of people, my colleagues and patients, relatives, whatever that looks like in your scope of practice. And actually, I'm going to review that over time. So this will also help boost your confidence and help you to see where you yourself need to grow as a practitioner. So the written reflective accounts then, the NMC requires registrants to reflect on their practice so that we can identify any improvements or changes that our practices need to have as a result of learning something. So your 5 written reflections can be about any of the CPD that you've completed. It doesn't have to be the ones you're submitting. It could be ones you aren't submitting, or the ones you are. It can be based on the feedback or experiences from your work. You could even write a reflection on combination of those things. This event took place and then this led to this learning, and I did this CPD as a result of that. That's extremely good reflective practice. So I think it's important to know as well that these reflections, you've just come from doing a degree, and these reflections don't need to be very long, detailed, academic specific type style pieces of writing, but keeping it nice and simple, and noting down, the most important thing is you're saying what you've learnt. You're showing how the learning has improved your practice or will improve your practice, and you're demonstrating, most importantly, how it relates to the code. As long as you're doing that, you're on the right track. And with this kind of part of revalidation, you must use the reflective accounts actually on the website. So the others templates can be recommended, but this one, the NMC require you to use the reflective template that they provide for you on there. So make sure, it's good to jot things down and put it over, but I mean, when I was newly registered, I actually had a blog, and I used the blog, the things I'd written before, and copied it into the template, and then I had to alter it into the template for it to fit. So you could do things like that, but in in the kind of idea of saving time and being more resourceful, I would, in hindsight now, I would have downloaded the template and actually based my blog reflections on the template, because they're really, really good questions and the way in which you think about what you're writing. And so actually it's a really good way of practicing good questioning and reflection by looking at that template in advance and then asking yourself those questions about your practice. But definitely anything that you've done, like a blog, for example, or vlogs, you can draw upon in terms of your ideas for your reflective accounts. So the reflective discussion. Now, I think this part of the revalidation is actually what most registrants tend to find really beneficial and really rewarding. At first, it's the thing they're kind of putting off, but actually it's quite powerful. So you can have a discussion with anybody who's an NMC registrant. So this is another thing, common assumption. It doesn't have to be your line manager. This could be someone who works directly with you. It could be your manager or an educator, a colleague, a peer. As long as they're NMC registered, you can have a reflective conversation with them. So this discussion should be really placed face to face. If it's not possible, then that's also fine, but it's generally better face to face. And you can cover either one of your written reflections that you've written and prepared. So it's also good about keeping you in line with your timeline in terms of getting things done, because you want to bring that reflective account to discuss. It could be about your CPD, it could be about your practice related feedback, for example, or any other experience from your practice that you want to discuss and you think has learning that relates to the code. And so how you have reflected and developed from that experience is the key and most important thing, and how that aligns to the code. So there is a mandatory, again, reflective discussion form with this one. So you must complete that reflective discussion form. And in that form, you will need to kind of document the NMC registrants' details of who you had that conversation with. So make sure you're stating their name, PIN number, and their email address, and their professional work address. And the date that you had that conversation. So it isn't so much about writing what discussion or everything that took place, a word for word account. It's about saying, this is a confirmer for my discussion that I've had. So the self-declarations then, this part is you must provide basically a health and character declaration. So you don't need any evidence for this as such. It's a self declaration. So you simply need to declare that you are of health and character, and that you're able to practice safely and effectively in line with the code at the time of signing. So you must also declare any kind of criminal offences, formal cautions, or any kind of fitness to practice detriment, anything that's going on in terms of your practice or a risk to your practice must be declared at this point. So and this is issued by the professional or regulatory body. And so you must also declare that you have or that you will be practicing with the appropriate cover under an indemnity arrangement. So don't panic. We are legally required to have that professional indemnity arrangement in place to be able to practice. However, in the UK, most employers do provide the appropriate cover for employees. So it's probably part of your contract, but it is definitely worth checking with your employer to confirm this. And if you are self-employed, for example, you will need to arrange your own professional indemnity cover. So if you're doing agency, for example, you need to ensure that you have the appropriate indemnity cover in place. Again, you don't need to provide evidence for this, but it is a declaration that you have to self-assert. And then finally, as part of the declarations, you will need to have a confirmer. So the role of a confirmer is a really important role, actually. So this is the person who looks at all your evidence, looks at your portfolio, and have, collective confirmation that you have met those revalidation requirements. So where possible, it's recommended that your confirmer should be your line manager in this case, just because they need to be on board with your process in revalidation. So your line manager in this case doesn't have to be an NMC registered nurse or midwife, but it can be the person who did your reflective discussion with you also. So that could be your confirmer, and what it can't be actually is a family member or a close friend or anybody who's considered to be kind of a conflict of interest. So your manager is your first protocol for this, and then you could ask the person who did your reflective conversation with if it's appropriate. So important information then. So your revalidation application, this is probably the most important note. This is the one that trips people up. So your revalidation application is due on the first day of the month in which you are about to have your registration expire. So say, for example, if the renewal date is the 30th of October, then your revalidation application date will be the 1st of October. So make sure you're on top of that. It's beforehand, and make sure you're aware of when that date is due. That's really important. That can really trip people up. And you can submit your application itself through NMC online. You usually get a fair amount of emails before as warnings and kind of saying, it's open, you can submit now, and they give you a year notice and things like this. So it's really helpful. But you should be able to, at any point during 60 days prior to that submission date, be able to put your application in. So utilize that time and don't leave it to the last minute. You never know what's going to go wrong with IT or any kind of technical difficulties. Just try and set yourself a deadline before the deadline is always the best idea. So each year, the NMC select a sample of nurses and midwives or nursing associates to give more information about that application. So this process is known as a verification. Okay, so it doesn't happen to everybody, but it can happen. So you need to be prepared in case it does happen. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you've done anything wrong or that there's a concern with your application itself. But actually, it's about just assurance to the process, and you can continue to practice while you're having this review of your information. And basically, what might you be asked to do in addition? Well, you might just be asked to provide a bit more information, some of your portfolio to be submitted, so they can, because that's important to know when you're actually uploading your application. You're not physically uploading your reflection, for example. You're just confirming you have done the reflections. So they might ask you to send that. And actually you'll have 21 days to actually submit once they've requested that, and you'll know within 24 hours of submitting your revalidation application and paying your fee if you've been selected for the verification process. So there's no need to panic. You have time, and you'll already have done it, so you'll just be submitting additional information. It's really not as stressful as it kind of seems when you're reading it online. And also, it's important as well to know that you could submit your revalidation, for example, and then pay your PIN. It doesn't have to be all at exactly the same moment. If you're at work and you're submitting something and you haven't got your card with you, for example, you can do it later. So that's kind of it for me, but I would leave you with some revalidation top tips. So being creative in your approach is really important. So make the most of your opportunity for CPD reflections. Remember, these conversations are about you. They're about your development and how you're going to grow as a practitioner. So don't feel like this is put upon you. Really try to be creative with your approaches. Do something different. Try something, maybe you're wanting to go and observe somebody's practice as part of your CPD. That's a fantastic way. And that also gives you a great opportunity to write a reflection as well. And maybe even gain some feedback. So you're getting 3 in 1 there. I would absolutely say do not delay in starting, okay? Because I'm a major procrastinator, I'll admit. And I did, in my first instance, leave it, I wouldn't say to the last minute. I was a bit more sensible than that, perhaps, but I did leave it to the last kind of couple of months. And it wasn't that it was a pressure, it was just gathering the information and kind of setting myself time to reflect in a decent way. And actually, I wish I'd made more effort, because I would have benefited more from doing that. So there's some really good recommendations actually for Claire Picton has a model which is used to revalidate. It's about making revalidation easy. There's a model for it, and actually it's about breaking it down year by year. It might not be your type of thing, but there are different ways in which you can keep on top of it and make sure that you're planning it, is what I would say. So plan it in the way that's going to work for you. And me as a procrastinator, that's about having reminders in my calendar, time before, maybe every kind of year or so, just saying, have you got any bits of information you want to add to this for now, so that you can think about it or reflect on it later. And the RCNI, for example, do have an online digital portfolio. So it's a really great way of keeping everything in one place. So I'm quite a chaotic person. So for me, everything's always all over the place, and I'm not very organized. So I find it hard to find things when I want them. But actually, that having that portfolio, which I do pay an additional fee to have a digital version, but actually that works really well for me. So uploading that stuff, so I have it there and it's in a safe place and I can just come back to it and I know I've done it, is really helpful. So there are loads of different methods like that, and it's about finding what's true and helpful to you in those cases. And my next kind of tip would be, make the most of this opportunity to network, because if you're looking for CPD, for example, you never know who you're going to connect with. And if you're picking CPD that's going to reflect something you're really interested in, or something that really inspires you to develop in your evidence-based practice, those people you connect with in those circumstances are going to be potentially partners in future quality improvement or research, or something you want to improve upon, or even maybe a career path for you. So make the most of networking with people through revalidation, really utilize that. And it really is an opportunity for self-growth and development. And I think we often forget to look after our own learning in these environments. We get short-staffed. There's a lot of pressure on us. There's a lot of day-to-day tasks are generally just hard work. But actually, our learning is absolutely vital and absolutely essential in delivering better care for patients, in delivering better services as a collective, and actually an investment into nurses, an investment into you and your learning, is an investment into the profession, is an investment into the wider scope of our services and our delivery in healthcare. So just try to remember that it is about self-growth and development, and that's fine and okay and should be celebrated, and we should be striving through that really and promoting it more than we do. And finally then, so don't forget to utilize the NMC online resources. So it seems obvious, but no, honestly, you would be amazed at the amount of things on that website. There's examples of revalidating, there's loads of demonstration, there's videos, there's so much resource templates. As I mentioned, there are a few mandatory ones, so make sure you're downloading that and ahead of time so you can understand what's required of you. But really, it's a really great resource on there. And also the NMC are really helpful. So if you want to, you can always tweet them or email them. And actually, if there is any concerns, they'd be more than happy to support or help you. Just like I am also happy to advise or signpost. So, you can find me on Twitter and I'll be happy to speak to anybody, or you can drop me an email. So thanks for having me. And I hope that you've been able to take something from this webinar that will enable you to feel less pressure in terms of revalidating. And I hope that you can now feel, fueled for excitement rather than worry about continuing your professional development, because really it's an opportunity and a great enhancer for our profession and ourselves as practitioners. So I'm happy to take questions in the live questions section, and I look forward to speaking to you then. Thank you.